is spring, and above Moscow the clouds hang ominously. They are dark and heavy, reflecting the mood of the city below. It is a kind of day for reflection and introspection, the kind of day that lends itself to funerals, mourning, and depression, and for many Russians, vodka. Beneath the eaves of the Pichushkin forest, just beyond the bustle of the country's largest city, two men sit together. They share grief, a conversation about loss, and a bottle of cheap native rotgut. The old man's eyes grow heavy with drink, and his side of the discussion lapses into silence. The young man pauses a moment, making sure that he's alone. Satisfied, he raises up his weapon, a common hammer, and strikes quickly, then a second and third time. The sound of the skull cracking doesn't pass much beyond the little circle of trees. It's all over in a moment. There's no fight, no struggle. The dead man slumps over, face first onto the ground. A minute later, the body is tossed down a nearby sewer pipe, never to be seen whole again. Pichushkin Park. It's a huge expanse of forest, 5,000 acres, lying within the capital city of Russia. It's one of the largest urban parks in the world and a favorite place for Muscovites of all types to forget their urban worries and get lost along its many trails. During the long winter months, skiers may be found sliding above the heavy snow, and in summer old men flock beneath the trees for some shade and a little chess. In 2001, a fledgling killer would slay one of these players and find himself a calling, and for the next 5 years he would make Pichushkin Park his own personal hunting ground. Although the Soviet Union had fallen a decade earlier, the shadow of the old ways had yet to fade. The old men and homeless drunks who were starting to disappear were written off easily. It was not until bodies started showing up that it began to grow clearer. They were found stuck up in drainage pipes, left to rot in some far-flung corner of the park, or sometimes they were found just as bones or slabs of flesh after a run-in with a sewage grinding unit. The police realized that someone was stalking the people of Moscow. A manhunt was on for the Bitsomaniac. While they searched, he watched from mere steps away, enjoying the show that they were putting on for him. On 9 April 1974, Natalia Pichushkin gave birth to her only son, Aleksandr Yureveyevich. 9 months later, her husband left her to raise the young boy alone. They lived relatively well, lower working-class style, but in Soviet Russia that was as good as it was going to get. They shared a tiny apartment together, and she worked hard to keep them in it, often leaving her young son with neighbors or alone. One day Natalia returned home from work to find her 4-year-old Sasha missing from the apartment. She searched the area and was horrified to find him unconscious beneath the apartment building's swing set. She rushed him to the hospital where he remained in a coma for several days. Scans showed damage to his frontal lobe. The boy remained under watch at the hospital for a week, but was then released to his mother. She realized immediately that something was wrong. Always a bright and happy child, Sasha seemed to have grown sullen and reserved. She noticed he was having difficulties with language. He had only been in public school for a few weeks before his mother decided to transfer him to a special public academy for children with disabilities. Aleksandr foundered there. He was much too smart for the special classes, and he was constantly bored. He began to grow frustrated and angry, especially when the local boys teased him for his attendance. Natalia's father noticed his increasing withdrawal on a holiday visit and suggested that the boy come live with him on the other side of the city and go to a different school in his area. Natalia agreed, knowing that it was probably the best place for him. After the move, Aleksandr began to thrive. Although he remained shy, he began succeeding in school. He visited his mother often, but preferred to spend time with his grandfather. The two would walk for hours together in Pichushkin Forest, stopping often to play chess in the many sitting areas scattered about the park. Sasha took to it readily. He grasped the game's dynamic immediately and grew quite proficient. Just when he was feeling safe and satisfied with his life, Aleksandr suffered another loss. In 1988, his grandfather died suddenly. The young man was devastated. Too young to live on his own, Aleksandr was forced to move back in with his mother. Natalia, noticing her son's loneliness without his grandfather, decided to get him a puppy. The young man took the dog on daily walks along his old routes in Pichushkin Park. He returned to school and seemed relatively well adjusted from his time with his grandfather. He was polite to adults and teachers, though he was still a little on the quiet side, although that was excused given his recent loss. He did well in his studies and even made a few friends. It was not until his last year in high school, around the time he turned 17, that his personality started to show real signs of violence. The Soviet Union was collapsing. The already volatile Russian society was growing increasingly chaotic. A Ukrainian named Andrei Chikatilo was arrested for the rape and murder of 36 women and children, and later confessed to a total of 53. He became an instant icon. He was a symbol of the Soviet Union's secret failures brought to light. He was one of the most horrific and brutal killers ever to walk, and Aleksandr Pichushkin became enthralled. The young man would talk for hours with his best friend Mikhail about Chikatilo and murder. They even planned killings together. The time came in 1992 when Pichushkin was no longer content to talk about it. It was time to act. Mikhail, however, wouldn't go through with it, saying that he thought that they were just joking all along. Aleksandr had been serious. He strangled the young man to death and left his body in Bitsa Park. Aleksandr waited calmly for the police to figure him out, but they never did. He graduated from carpentry school and took up a job as a handyman at a local store. He lay low for several years. Around the time he turned 22, he was thrown for one more emotional loop. His beloved dog died. The loss of a pet may not seem like the sort of thing that could affect a grown man so deeply, but his dog was the one living thing that he thought would never abandon him. His father had left before he could speak, and his grandfather died just when he needed a male role model the most. And his mother, who loved him dearly, admitted that she had spent most of her time working and had little time left for him. Aleksandr fell into a deep depression. He began drinking heavily, even for Russian standards, often stumbling home from work and passing out in the stairwell of his mother's building until she came home to collect him. He lacked any direction or motivation. Then, in the spring of 2001, he pulled himself out of his funk and found a direction, a goal. He decided to become the most prolific serial killer in Russian history, outdoing his long-admired Chikatilo.